Nintendo and Sega share a significant history, and even now we may see some of that history repeating itself. Let's chat about it in the comments below, but first, my opinion. I'm Tarmack, and this is Feature Creep. I should have called this the Gaming History Channel. Back in the 90s, Sega was high on the horse. They were primarily an arcade game manufacturer back in the early 80s, but the 90s was where we saw the company enter into the console market. The Master System may have been lackluster in America, but did well in many other countries, and the Genesis was a mainstay of console gaming throughout the 90s. Sega made a few rather historic mistakes, however, which took a bit of the bluster out of their sales. The Game Gear was an amazing handheld, if you were okay with only a few good games, and owned stock in Duracell because the number of batteries required was staggering. It didn't do a very good job of competing with the Nintendo Game Boy, despite being a color system to Game Boy's monochrome design. Then they launched the Sega Saturn in '94, which flopped because of the cheaper and in many respects better Sony PlayStation, which launched in the same year. The PlayStation just had more games, and the Saturn was abandoned relatively soon afterwards. This is the major failure number one that I want everyone watching to remember. Failure number two was the launch of the Dreamcast in 1998. The Nintendo 64 and PlayStation competitor had a good price, an included modem, and a more powerful architecture, but would fail yet again primarily because of its lackluster launch lineup. It would be only 3 more years before Sega would abandon hardware development in the console market entirely to focus on software, and this after several years of substantial losses. Now, I love Nintendo products for the most part, and it's interesting to watch the aging game company make mistake after mistake but still trudge onwards. The Wii was such a runaway success with the normative Nintendo game design style that over 100 million of the blasted little machines are out in the wild. The Wii U, however, well, that's a bit of a different matter. The Wii U represents an enormous failure in the Nintendo design philosophy, and for the sake of argument, let's call this mistake number 1. It was the first time that Nintendo did an incremental upgrade. The Wii U is essentially a more powerful Wii with a special controller. And the combination of consumer confusion over its name and place in the market, with a very poor launch lineup, has it currently pegged at a bit under 13 million consoles on the market. 13 million still sounds good though, right? I mean, it's no PlayStation or Xbox, but that's still a lot of hardware. Well, as it turns out, the heavy investment to make the Wii U, combined with less than stellar sales, has resulted in losses that Nintendo has yet to dig themselves out of. In 2012, they lost $500 million, with another $250 million loss in 2014. And for 2016, the Wii U missed its targets while the 3DS met its goals. Given the current performance of the Wii U itself, it is likely to end its life cycle as the worst performing Nintendo console of all time. So why do I bring all of this up? Well, next year, supposedly in March, there's going to be a new Nintendo console. The codename NX system has very little known about it, which is beyond weird at this point in the year. 9 months away, and it doesn't even have a name yet. The system was not at E3, no games were shown for it. Before I go and put my foot in my mouth, let me say that I think the 3DS market is of course very safe and stable so long as the game franchises like Pokemon exist. Nintendo has no real competition in handhelds, well, so long as you don't consider mobile games, that is. And with Pokemon Go recently released, I've got to say, I see a pretty heavy future in mobile for Nintendo. However, the Nintendo finances look awfully familiar. Where have I seen a financial graph that looks like this before? Oh right, this is exactly what Sega's financial record looked like just before they folded their console division. It all comes down to this. I believe that the NX is likely Nintendo's Dreamcast, only worse in that other console manufacturers are moving towards a more PC-like design, and while we don't know much about the NX, what rumors do exist point to a device very far removed from a PC-style design structure. With the other major players making porting easier for game developers, this is not likely to be the case with stock standard proprietary Nintendo products. Nintendo is already dealing with heavy losses over the last 5 years, and if the NX fails to recapture the magic of Nintendo consoles, I think it will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. What I don't see happening is Nintendo making another console if the NX fails, especially not with the direction the game industry is moving. And given that Nintendo first and foremost is an intellectual property giant, what better way for them to continue to do business than with how I started this piece? History will repeat itself, only instead of Sega, this time it will be Nintendo forced to make games for other platforms because its own platforms aren't profitable enough anymore to justify the expenditure. And frankly, I don't really care about Nintendo hardware. It's their games that I want, and absolutely nothing about those games would prevent any of them from being written to run natively on PC or the existing consoles, other than because they're Nintendo and that's how they roll. We're already seeing amazing progress with Dolphin emulating Wii U games on PC, for example, and emulation is rarely an ideal way to do things. The problem, unfortunately, with the NX is that it's stepping into pretty rough territory. Releasing a console in March is a bit weird. The North American launches of the Nintendo Entertainment System were in October, SNES in late August, Nintendo 64 in September, GameCube in November, Wii in November, Wii U in November. March isn't the worst time to release anything ever, that being January and February, where the Christmas bill shock happens, but it certainly doesn't match their history, nor is it commonly held to be a good time to launch hardware. Beyond that, the hype cycle hasn't begun yet and the system's only 9 months out. People need time to have that word-of-mouth marketing spread. They need a name to be excited about. As much as I'm not a fan of pre-order culture, the fact of the matter is that the marketing cycle does need some advance time for consumers to know that something is coming down the pipe. They need time to budget because these things aren't cheap. And to not even have a name yet or an official announcement says two things to me at this point. It's either being delayed heavily, or they're going to rush it to market ahead of the inevitable Xbox and Sony fall 2017.5 console launches in hopes of not having competition. And if they do that, it's dead in the water. Now, just to stave off one particular argument that I fully expect, yes, it is possible for one business line to subsidize another. Nintendo has been subsidizing their console hardware with 3DS earnings for quite a few years now. And if the 3DS stuff remains successful, it is plausible that the NX could fail and still have a follow-up. Their stock price jumped by over 8% with the release of Pokemon Go, so my doom and gloom certainly isn't the direction of bankruptcy or anything like that. The problem is that they are a public company, and shareholders don't particularly like seeing a company fail time and again, with a particular business line always being the bad one. And less than stellar net income numbers for the last 5 years or so, it's hard to justify going after the hardware market with failure after failure. Hate to say it, folks, but I think Nintendo is on the cusp of becoming a primarily software-only company. Sure, they'll still do 3DS, and from the sounds of things, a pretty heavy focus on mobile, but if the NX isn't a smash success, I don't think there'll be another Nintendo console after it. The only question will be, what do they do with their software division? I realize that it's contentious to speak negatively of game industry darling Nintendo. The same generally goes with Valve, but let's chat about this issue in the comments and I'd love to read what you have to say about it. The game footage shown is of a game called Song of the Deep, which comes out on Steam Monday. I'm using it because I can't use Nintendo footage for fear of copyright claims. Yet another thing Nintendo does that I believe is an incredibly short-sighted move that is, in my view, harming their overall business. Feature Creep is a regular show every week, so if you enjoyed this, whether you agree or not, subscribing couldn't hurt. That's all I have to say. Tarmack out.